You were in time for this session. We have a full session, so I see that there's still some people coming in. Take your time to find your seat, but I do want to get the plenary started. It's great to see you all back again in the plenary room. We had a very nice visit with some lovely designs in architecture that we saw in Biopark in the zoo visit yesterday. That was lovely. I saw definitely some people with some tired eyes, so I know that there were people that went on into town for a bit more networking, I should probably say. My name, for those of you that don't know me, is Danny de Man. I work for EAZA, and I'm chairing this plenary session on ex situ conservation. Central to this plenary session will be the IUCN ex situ guidelines, or in full terms, the IUCN Species Survival Commission guidelines on the use of ex situ management for species conservation. And sort of throughout, we will also be making references to the one plan approach. These guidelines are fairly well known among our community. They're adopted by Council, and as you, of course, are aware, they are a pillar of our new population management structure, and we use these guidelines to set our roles and goals for our population management programs. But having said that, these guidelines are not very well known outside of our community, and that's really a shame, and that's something we would like to change. You know, these guidelines need to be better known by NGOs, by governments, etc. And secondly, there's not nearly enough integrated conservation planning where ex situ conservation needs are properly assessed and actions identified and carried out. We need much more of that. And an example here is, or another example is that they're often used as a last resort. In the international conservation community, ex situ is looked at as a last option. We all know that that isn't as simple as that. A population needs time to build. We need to have time to understand the husbandry and get the breeding sorted and correct, feeding, etc. I don't have to explain these things to you, but we do need to explain these things to the outside world. And an example that I'm sure will be referred to in one of the talks, is the Fakita extinction, where we are probably too late and where we could potentially have done way better if we got involved earlier on. Another thing is that ex situ conservation is often seen as equal to reintroductions. Of course, there is a lot of great work going on from our community in terms of reintroductions. There's a lot of successes, and those are very important. There's a very important ambition to work on for a number of species. But these guidelines describe many, many other roles and other ex situ conservation roles. And they're often forgotten. We do have that expertise, but people do not always know that head starting, conservation research, insurance populations, and many more are part of professional ex situ conservation as well. So really what I'm trying to say here is that it is up to our community to raise awareness of these guidelines and how you professionally go about ex situ conservation. And the talks today from different angles, some from our own work in population management programs, some work from our tags, some work from external partners we work with, all show the work that we do in relation to ex situ conservation. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Friederike von Houwald from Basel Zoo, our Rhino Tech Chair, known to many of you. Friederike will be taking two talks because the second talk was going to be given by Susie Ellis, but for personal reasons she couldn't attend this conference. She sends her apologies and best regards. So Friederike will start with her presentation on the Rhino RCP and some working with other regions, and then after that she'll change his heads and be Susie Ellis and speak about the work on ex situ conservation for Sumatran rhino. Friederike?
Hello everyone, and thank you Danny for the words. I hope you had fantastic lunch and didn't eat too much, so you stay awake. So I was asked to give a talk on behalf of the RCP, I called it now 2018, of the Rhino TAG, and its role in ex situ conservation for the greater one-horned rhinos. Before the last annual meeting in Athens, a workshop was set up to discuss the new RCP and its implication. We had 2 days of smoking hats, and we managed, but, and this is a huge but, specifically thanks to Merel, Maike and Raymond from EAZA office, had to do quite some homework beforehand and collect a huge amount of relevant information. Now, since the Rhino TAG is very well connected to the IUCN African Rhino Specialist Group and the Asian Rhino Specialist Group, it was rather easy to obtain important information from the field and from the conservation projects. But the information was really vast and diverse given the amount of countries where wild rhinos still live in. So we, as a Rhino TAG, do have a mission, a vision and a mission we work on. It is to have a healthy, viable population of free-ranging and intensively managed rhinos, ranging through intact ecosystems where they are valued and cherished both locally and globally. And to ensure all captive populations are healthy, self-sustaining, genetically viable, and capable of being an effective tool in support of rhino conservation. Now, we came up with goals, obviously, in this RCP, and one of the goals was to, in order to ensure each EEP population is self-sustaining and genetically viable in the long term, the TAG is exploring working more closely with other regions to support effective population management. Another goal, obviously, is fundraising and research, and as I mentioned before, we have a very good cooperation with established conservation partners, that is Save the Rhino International and the International Rhino Foundation. And from Save the Rhino International, they are the executive director, Kathy Dean. She's also a conservation advisor for the TAG. We also participate in the IUCN Specialist Group, which has been now going on since 10 years and really successful. And on the other side, the IUCN members serve as conservation and scientific advisors for the Rhino TAG. When coming to fundraising for conservation education and research in ex situ and in situ, currently over 30 rhino conservation projects are supported by EAZA Zoos. It's also one goal of the TAG to work in forensics. Rhino holders should register each animal in RODIS, the Rhino DNA Index System database via SASA. And that actually helps a lot to, or it contributes to determine poaching sources and networks, which also adds to the safety of our EAZA population. The TAG is also encouraging holders to collect extra blood, tissue and or serum whenever an animal is sedated. This biobank aims to be a primary resource for genetically supporting population management and conservation research. So the results were all set up in this nice document, and I will just very briefly now go in a few details of the outcomes of the RCP. Now, the results were for the southern white rhino as expected, that it does remain an EEP with direct conservation roles serving as an insurance population, conservation education, indirect roles for fundraising, conservation education, forensics, expertise, equipment, and research. As with the northern white rhinos, you all know that there are only 2 animals left in Kenya, in Old Pecheta. So there's, it's kind of obvious to say monitoring, but the main role here is to receive support from the southern white rhino population for assisted reproductive technologies. And those of you who attended the second session of the Rhino TAG, you were informed about what is happening at the moment with the northern white rhino technologies. Now, for the eastern black rhino, and this is the main subspecies kept within Europe, it has been said that obviously it does remain an EEP, but it also can increase still numbers with this very similar direct and indirect conservation roles. And the southern black rhinoceros, we do not want to have, as it's mainly kept in EAZA zoos, and the southwestern black rhinoceros subspecies. That is from Namibia, and that subspecies is not kept in any zoo as well, worldwide. For the great one-horned rhinos, it's also obviously remaining an EP, and we also aim to increase the numbers with direct and indirect conservation roles. Sumatran rhinos and Javan rhinos, I'm sure you all know, and you will hear more about in the second talk about the Sumatran rhinos, that the numbers are very low, below 80, and Javan rhinos are between 56 and 68 numbers in the wild. Now, when you look at each EP and the roles they have, one can actually say that all 3 EPs do really well. And each EP set out plans in the RCP to hold the numbers or to increase numbers to meet the goal of the RCP. So for the black rhino, a beautiful solution has been found, a solution that really satisfies the vision and mission of the Rhino tag, and that to ensure all captive populations are healthy, self-sustaining, genetically viable, and capable of being an effective tool in support of rhino conservation. And Mark will talk more about it later. White rhinos, as we set out in the goal to keep them as they are, maybe increase a little bit, but not too much, and they do very well as well. The nice thing with the white rhinos, you really can keep them in large groups and with other species quite easily. So the goals for the greater one-horned rhinos were also to increase in numbers and to reach out to other regions. This EP as well is a very nice success story. They breed well. Animals do get older, especially the males, since they do not die of chronic foot problems anymore at the age of around 20, which was quite common 20 years ago. And they do really well because of improved management and husbandry. When you look at the age pyramid for the international rhino population, there are some not so good news. The founder base, unfortunately, is very low. Not all founders have bred in the past. And there's also a move towards males. More males than females were born in the past years. Mainly, there is now a surplus of males. Sorry for the word surplus. We have to delete and copy that now in every talk we give. And the other thing is that building for great one-horned rhinoceros is quite more expensive than for other rhinos species. As I said before, it's not cheap, and finding new homes for greater one-horned rhinos is really difficult. It's not cheap. An animal, a male greater one-horned rhino, is highly territorial, it lives alone. Space is needed to do it really well. They have this very bizarre breeding performance, which is rather aggressive, and you do need to have space. And to prolong the interbirth interval is not really a long-term solution in this species either, as in other rhino species, because they do tend to have problems with the reproductive tract in the female. So what are the solutions for our EP? Now, solution one obviously is to reach out to EAZA, and we have done that, especially to improve the founder base. The EP is in constant contact to EAZA to exchange animals. But there's a huge but, that means cost. You know, at the current state, to import a rhino from America to Europe ranges around $50,000. So that is quite a story. The second solution is to reach out to Asia. There are some very good facts going about it. The one is they have space available. They have very keen interest actually in this species. Money often is available to build properly for great one-horned rhinos. Money is also available to cover costs for the transport. They're keen in education conservation, and they're keen to support financially in situ projects. But there are obviously challenging facts. They have basically no knowledge of the species. They may have kept the species in the past, but not successful at all. Very often there are dealers involved. I do receive emails and calls, and they ask me to buy animals. Then they don't name the zoo the animal should be going to. Therefore, it's very difficult to share or to advise or to cooperate, especially when they want to buy animals. They reaching out to America and to us. And they're not familiar with the EAZA policy of acquisition, donation, and our new PMM, and the EP structure, and the purpose, actually, of a breeding program. So I will tell you now a story what happened, and you will see, this is a sheet I just did in a rush to show you how complicated it all kind of can get when you do all this work. But in 2017, I was contacted by the Chimlong group that they showed very keen interest in the species. And as kind of expected, they were looking for a female because they had imported a male. And they had this mail. I asked them for pictures before I discuss anything further, and they did. And as you may expect, I was not very happy to see what I saw, and I told them that they can just stop it. I mean, they're not going to get a female under these premises. And I said, that's okay. They invited me to come and to tell them and to teach them what to increase. So I did go with my head keeper, and the dialogue started. So we spent quite some time on developing plans, because they were building a new zoo with a very interesting name, Qiangyuan ex situ Breeding Center for Endangered Plants and Species, and that area is huge. It is really large, and they really intend to build large and state-of-the-art facilities. And one also has to say the climate is very nice. So we were setting up plans, discussed with them the whole process, and actually the process I'm talking to about is, where's the pointer? Okay, this is a Great One Species EP, like the coordinator, and we were back and forth with Jim Long in plans, questions. Finally, once we've got the plans ready, we sent it to our species committee. They obviously had plenty of questions which had to be answered again, so that dialogue kept on going. Once they okayed it, we forwarded to the EAZA EP committee. Of course, they had questions, and we had to go back and forth the whole ways. And then the EP committee also asked us to sign documents and to find agreement. And then we sent this all back, and the documents were signed and agreed. Then this went to EAZA Council for further discussion. EAZA Council decided. The decision was sent via EAZA office to me, and I could confirm. So that took us about a year and a half to work through this process. Now, the interesting thing is really we found a serious partner that is willing to work hard, and it seems to be trustworthy because what they tell you they want to do, they actually do. We found a partner that has money, space, and time to learn about Great One Horned Rhinos and is willing to implement all necessary issues needed to keep and manage and breed this species, which is quite rare. They really took up every idea and advice we have. And they're very interested in joining a breeding program. So the solution now for us was not to send Great One Horned Rhinos out and forget them while the time passes by and no idea is what is going to happen. But the idea is to find a new partner we can consult with. Animal husbandry and management, animal veterinarian aspects, education outreach, conservation research, engagement in regional breeding programs with this species in cooperation with EAZA. So they were building their exhibit. You saw the previous one was the indoor exhibit, and because of the very nice climate, they really don't need stables. But the outdoor exhibit, this is just the holding facility. The breeding facility looks different as well. A lot of papers were signed and sent back and forth, and that's also a paper which was signed by them stating they do not use rhino horn. This is everybody thinks that every Chinese person is consuming rhino horn. And to be honest, I went to a meeting with the African Rhino Specialist Group in Namibia from IUCN, and they also were very worried about the rhinos in China. And I can tell you the rhinos in Chimlong have been kept in a fantastic state. So we have all these documents signed. And so now what is our role here of the Great One Horned Rhinoceros in ex situ conservation? Yes, we did find partners in Asia. We guided them through a very intensive time where all plans were established and MOU signed with regard to EAZA donation acquisition policy, animal husbandry, management, breeding. And they have now become non-EAZA members of the EAZA Greater One Horned EP. They are approved, and the facilities were also approved by the speech committee. Now, since everything has been signed, the EP coordinator has selected animals. The facilities are almost ready. Currently, the papers are prepared and transport is organized to send animals out to Europe to their new destination in Asia. And we will continue to help them to set up a new breeding program in Asia. Obviously, I will need a lot of help from Bengt, where we can assist more with that. And we will continue to guide them and help them to find the way. So what are the next steps? The next steps obviously is we keep on revisiting the facilities, send rhinos plus keeper when we go there, integrate them in the breeding program and advise them in conservation and education options. Actually, they have a fantastic education program running already. The benefits. I think we can share our experience we were able to gather in the past 60 years in breeding greater one-horns with other regions. We can provide help to ensure animal welfare is guaranteed to good husbandry and management. We can help to engage other countries in rhino conservation outreach. We can help to engage other countries, user countries, in demand reduction. This new zoo will have 30 million visitors. Think about the education reach you can have. So I think we found a solution to outplace our animals instead of stop breeding and jeopardizing thereby our own breeding program. Worth the trouble? It is a hell lot of work. It's a challenge, and the question remains, as always, when sending out animals, have we made a mistake? Can we trust the partners? But it is, in our belief, a great opportunity to live the one-plan approach, to ensure that the vision and mission of the Rhino TAG will not just be words, but also put it into action in all aspects laid out in the RCP. So I feel privileged to have met these new partners and to be able to assist them. And I think if the Greater One-Horned Rhino EEP can do it, more EEPs can do that too. Thank you very much for your attention. So now I'm changing hats. I'm now speaking, I'm giving this paper. I will read it now from her presentation. I'm giving this paper on behalf of my friend and colleague, Dr. Susie Ellis of the International Rhino Foundation. I'm going to share news about an exciting new collaboration and what may well be the last chance to save the Sumatran rhino. The Sumatran rhino is perhaps the most critically endangered large mammal on Earth, and fewer than 80 remain in isolated pockets of Indonesian rainforest. And Susie asked me to point out like 80 people, and I think if I take maybe half that side on that side, maybe these are 80 people. Imagine this is their all remains in Sumatran rhinos, not a lot of animals. So this map shows the distribution of the Sumatran rhino, 3 fragmented sites on the island of Sumatra, and 1 tiny pocket with only a handful of animals in Kalimantan, Indonesia, Borneo. Sumatran rhinos face many threats. It's poaching, human disturbance, small population effects in inbreeding, habitat loss, fragmentation, disease, and catastrophes. It is one of those areas where you actually have volcanic eruptions and tsunamis. Since the mid-90s, the RAF has funded rhino protection units in South Sumatra through the Rhino Foundation of Indonesia, YABI. That is there. And more recently in North Sumatra through the Loisa Conservation Forum. Yet, despite these active protection, the Sumatran rhino population continues to decline. As part of the RAF Sumatran Rhino program in 1996, it built the Sumatran Rhino Sanctuary, a 100 square kilometer breeding and research center set squarely in the middle of Waikambas National Park. Rhinos at the facility receive state-of-the-art veterinary and husbandry care by staff of YABI and the Rhino Foundation of Indonesia. IRF and YABI have just doubled the size of the Sumatran Rhino Sanctuary so that it can now house up to 12 animals. Each animal has 2 10-hectare forest pens through which they can regularly rotate so that food plants can regenerate. The expansion also contains a second breeding area, quarantine facility, labs, veterinarian office facilities, and staff dormitories. The entire SRS is not open to the public, but there are also a new visitor center and a rainforest trail where a limited number of visitors can see an ambassador animal. There have been 2 calves born at the facility, the first male Andatu on the 23rd of June in 2012, and the female Delilah, who was born on the 12th of May in 2016. The pendulum swung in 2017, whereas before the government of Indonesia was more focused on protection, it now has developed a Sumatran rhino emergency plan that heavily focuses on rescue and bringing animals into managed breeding centers like SRS. This is largely because of the SRS breeding success, which built on the success of Cincinnati Zoo. Led by the government of Indonesia, a new collaboration formed in 2018, including funding partners who have each pledged 1 million over 3 years. These are the logos you find in the first row. And a number of strategic partners also have signed, including Zoo Wilhelma in Stuttgart, the Cincinnati Zoo, Save the Rhino, and Taronga Conservation Society Australia, pledging $100,000 over 3 years. We're still actively fundraising for the project, which in Indonesia is being implemented by the Rhino Foundation of Indonesia, YABI, the Loise Conservation Forum, and WWF Indonesia. The first rescue under the project has taken place. Pahu, a female, was rescued in Kutai Barat, Kalimantan in November 2018. And we believe there are a handful of other animals in the area, and as possible, there also will be brought in. The next capture will be in Waikambas National Park in Sumatran. If all goes well, pit traps will be set in spring 2020 with an aim to capture 1.2 reproductively viable animals to join the SRS breeding program in the park. I'd like to share a rough cut video with you. What? Oh, it's there. Okay. That shows the dedication of our team and gives you a bit of flavor of what the Sumatran rhino rescue is all about.
In the Sumatran Rhino Sanctuary in Waikambas National Park, we have 7 Sumatran rhino in captivity. I end up here with the big responsibility to saving an animal that's in the brink of extinction.
Sumatran rhino is the smallest rhino compared with the other rhino.
It's the only rhino species that have hair all over the body. Also, they have personalities, so they are clever. Now, the number of Sumatran rhino is considered less than 80 animals. My responsibility is to make sure they are happy, healthy, and then could breed a lot of baby. Calf producing is very, very low. It's about 4 to 5 years per calf. If the Sumatran rhino died, it's a big loss because the effort to increase the number is very, very hard.
Because of this population being isolated, they cannot meet each other. This is the most endangering factor. Now our policy is that we have to breed as many babies as possible, and then we also have to restore the habitat. Humans encroach in the forest and use the habitat of the rhino. Rhino Protection Unit consists of 4 people. Their work is to survey the area, dismantle traps if they found, and also help the national park
to stop all the poaching, to stop all the deforestation. We need to work together. We are working very closely with the local people. We have the keepers and then also food collector. They need to collect 60 kilograms per each rhino.
Being caretakers of the Sumatran rhino is actually it's a big challenge. Because all people around the world see what we do.
We feel that all eyes and sometimes all fingers are pointing to us, but we know that we are doing something important for the world. When we saw the baby was born and then moving, and now she's happy and healthy, so that makes us very, very proud of our job here.
This is proof that we can breed the rhino. It's already a glimpse of hope that we can do that. Actually, we know what to do. But what we need is the support. What we did here is just the beginning.
I want to make sure that in the future I still have time to see the rhino. Because not all people can see. Not all can.
I have kids, and I hope their kids will still see Sumatran rhino in the wild.
Yes. Sumatran rhinos need your help. Please consider joining International Rhino Foundation. Together we can save this magnificent species. The International Rhino Foundation is working really hand in hand with all of the Sumatran rhino rescue partners, and most strategic partners. Zoos have opted to become involved through the RF, or its very good partner, Save the Rhino in the UK. So if you would like to get involved, contact Susie Ellis or Kathy Dean at Save the Rhino, and they will go back to you. It would be awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Friederike, and I can only echo your last words. If you want to get in touch with this important initiative to save a critically endangered species, which I'm sure many of us with the emotional video we have seen might be interested in doing, please contact these organizations. Please also extend my thanks to Susie for preparing this talk, and thank you for giving it, as well as your first talk, which I can only say I very much appreciate the efforts of you and the Rhino TAG in working hard on these RCP documents, as well as finding out a platform, understanding that it is time-consuming, how to work with partners in other regions. So thank you, Friederike. We are staying for one more talk with rhinos, and then we explore some other taxa. The next speaker is Mark Pilgrim, CEO of Chester Zoo and the North of England Zoological Society. Also our newly appointed EP Committee Chairman. Mark was appointed as EP Committee Chair in April during the Directors' Day and after Council elections. Mark is also the EP Coordinator for the Black Rhino EP and will be talking to you about the release of the recent releases of rhino in Rwanda from the EP, and will be linking also to the new rules and procedures for reintroductions that EAZA approved as well in Jersey. Mark?
Good afternoon, everybody. I want to tell you that this project is very much an EAZA project. So as I'm telling you the story of how we did it and where we are now, what I really want is that all of you, each and every one of you who are part of EAZA, feels proud of what's been achieved here. There's still a long way to go. So let me tell you the story. So I took over the Black Rhino EEP more than 10 years ago. And at that time, the EEP was running okay. It was ticking over. And at that time, we also decided to set a goal for the EEP. And these are the goals that we set. And I think for all of the EEP coordinators out there, it's really important that you set yourself a long-term goal for your EEP. So we want to ensure a healthy and sustainable EEP population to maintain the requirements of EAZA zoos for the long term. That was the first priority. We also set ourselves the target of trying to reach a 5% growth rate per year for the eastern black rhino. That was a really challenging target for us, and that was 5% was set on the growth rate that is set by the Kenyan Wildlife Service for free-ranging rhinos. So we felt if we could achieve anywhere near that, we were doing okay. We wanted to as most EEPs, we wanted to maintain 90% of the gene diversity from our founders over 100 years. And then the fourth one was very aspirational 10 years ago, to work closely with the African Rhino Specialist Group and governments to make eastern black rhino available for return to Africa to supplement populations where needed. And at that time, I guess that seemed a little bit pie in the sky. So just a quick overview of the population growth. You can see there that something happened around 1986, something like that. We had a big increase, particularly in the number of females in the population. And the population has been rather rapidly growing ever since, with a female high skew, which is actually very good because that helps us our breeding. We like to have more females than males in any one collection, so that's been really useful. And then I wanted to say, when you start looking at population, often we talk about how well our population is doing, but we mustn't forget the keepers. You know, if we don't have really excellent keepers, excellent husbandry skills, people taking care of those rhinos every day, good veterinary care and all the support that goes in, none of this can happen. So they are really the foundation of our breeding programs. And to assist with that, we set out some best practice guidelines for eastern black rhino with a whole number of collaborators and experts from this community. So just a quick overview of the population then. Some of what I've told you, but the things that are really important to notice is that the percentage of the ancestry known of our population is 100%. And that's really helpful. That means that actually when we do our calculations on mean kinship, for example, we can be really confident in the results that come out and actually be really confident that what we're producing is the right answer. In terms of the demographic population, you can see that the population is a fairly normal one in terms of the size of the population. But what I wanted to show to you in this slide particularly was the growth rate that's been achieved. So we can't do a year-on-year growth rate very easily for any species whose gestation period is more than 1 year. It doesn't make a great deal of sense. So we average it over 3 years, as they do with populations in Africa. And if we now average for the last 3 years our eastern black rhino population, you see that we get to 4.3% growth rate. So we're getting pretty close to that 5% of free-living animals. While that's fantastic, and we're really proud of that, of course, it creates us some problems. So this is a quick overview of the last 11 years. And again, don't worry about all of the numbers on there. There's a few things I want to really point out. One is the growth in the number of EAZA zoos who are taking on eastern black rhinos from 15 to 25. And I'm really grateful for the new participants, but we're still looking for more. The number of births in that period, at the bottom there in yellow, is 51 births in 11 years. The number of transfers at 59. And actually all of this is built on EAZA spirit. It's really difficult, it's complicated to move these rhinos around, to transport them, to get agreement from people, and it takes an enormous amount of cooperation. But that's what this community is all about. It's about working together for a species. And so, again, to all of the holders, all of the people involved in the Black Rhino EEP, It's a great show of what the EEP spirit can do. And then you can see, of course, we've had deaths during that period, so 51 births and 23 deaths. So then we started looking at our population and thinking about when would we be ready for that, putting animals back to Africa where needed. And I have to thank very much Maker, who produced an analysis for us of harvesting rates from our population to see what would happen. And basically what it shows, and hopefully you can see it clearly on this graph, is that if you look at the, I don't know how you can read, oh yeah, it's not too bad on there. So you can see that actually if you follow the, what is the purple graph, we still increase our population if we harvest or reintroduced 5 rhinos from the population every 4 years. We still get a population increase if it stays, if the levels stay the same as they are now. We could even perhaps do 5 reintroductions every 3 years and keep the population stable. So somewhere between 5 every 3 or 4 years is about what we can do without having any effect on our EAZA population. Okay, so once you get to the stage that you've got a population that's working well, people who are cooperating, and the population's growing such that you can look at supplementing wild populations, and just to say that's 10 years of work in the foundation to get to that point, there are some really important documents to follow, as Danny mentioned, so I won't go through them here, but the ex situ guidelines from the IUCN and also the EAZA Population Management Manual, which now have some really useful information about translocations. So please look at them if you're thinking about it. I was asked to talk about the process that I followed to make this happen, and I'm not really very much of a process person or very organised in my thinking always, so I tried to put down all the steps that I took to make it happen. And I guess all of these things, some of them are more difficult than others. First was to find the right project and then visit it. I was very fortunate that actually the project came to me from somebody who was interested in working in Akagera National Park in Rwanda, and I didn't know anything about Akagera National Park at the time. But I'll come to that later. And then you have to do the analysis of the population, as I've just shown you, to consider the impact on the life of the EEP and whether or not you can actually do it or not. But you also have to consider the life histories of the animals. And then you have to communicate a lot. You have to talk to the EEP participants, the owners of the animals, and eventually you write a proposal. Then you have to talk to the owners and the holders of the animals you're planning to reintroduce. So in this case, for example, it was the Królové Zoo in the Czech Republic. It was Park in Denmark, but the animal was owned by the Aspinall Foundation, and it was also Flamingo Land in the UK. And then you write a proposal, and then you seek approval from the Species Committee. And again, we only had one person who was not so sure about the projects. We had a great support from the Species Committee. Then we discussed it with our wonderful TAG chair. And then we had to get endorsement. I say endorsement because the IUCN specialist groups don't really approve anything, but it's really helpful to get their endorsement. And again, I'll touch on that a little bit later. Then you plan the details and update the proposal, and that's about what time of year you're going to do the transfer. And it gets really complicated. I learned so much through this process, so much about the politics of Rwanda, what period of time, because of political institutions, you can't do things. Trying to make sure that it happens when there's enough natural browse, but it's not so wet, the trucks get bogged down on the roads. All of these things are actually quite complicated, but all needs a lot of planning. And then, of course, you need to approval from the EP committee. And then the really hard bit for me was to develop an MOU with the key partners. And in this case, it was the Rwandan Development Board, so that's the government of Rwanda, the Akagera Management Company, that is the company that manages the whole of the national park for the government, and EAZA. It was very important that this was very much an EAZA-led project. Then what I hadn't quite figured, and the last ones I put in because they're the things that I didn't anticipate, we had to do an enormous amount of fundraising to make this project happen. And then, of course, once you've done that, you can start to implement it. And you can't do that without brilliant partners. And I have to say, the Królové Zoo in the Czech Republic did an absolutely amazing job at doing all of the logistics of this move. And again, I'm going to show you some pictures about that. The bit that I really underestimated was the media plan. How much media attention suddenly comes on you when you start to get moving with this project. And it's really important that your goals and you understand what you're trying to do and that you can actually pass that across, because the press misinterpret it. I had to explain to the British press on a number of occasions, this is not a rescue of animals from some horrible zoo, freeing them in the wild. These are animals that are doing extremely well, and we're actually putting them at risk, sending them back as part of a real conservation project. That wasn't what they expected. Then I guess we're at the stage we are now, or there's more to do, of evaluating, writing it up, and learning lessons. Okay, now some pictures. So this is Akagera National Park in Rwanda. It's an absolutely wonderful park, and you should all go and visit. I hope this shows you sort of where it is. So that's the national park there on your left, and there it is with the little circle in East Africa. So it's actually savanna, and you can see the dark green on the larger map is actually papyrus swamp. It's a really swampy, wet area, and the paler green is actually sort of typical East African savanna. I'm going to go quite quickly now. Here's how Akagera National Park looks like. It was decimated after the genocide in Rwanda, and there's a number of reintroductions already happened there, giraffe, lions, etc. So it's a fantastic opportunity to see how to rewild and redevelop an African park. Security is massive. It's the most important issue to convince the zoos is the right thing to do. And the picture at the top there is actually the last eastern black rhino that was poached out in 2007. Things have changed since then. This is not a bald man's convention. It is actually the African Rhino Specialist Group, where I was able to present on this project. But actually I presented on lots and lots of different conferences and took advice from the experts. And then we started to move with the transport. First of all, we sent all 5 animals to Diverkrolove, where we could actually just socialise them and get them ready for crate training for the transfer. And they were in Diverkrolove for 6 months. Here they are being crate trained. And then the real journey begins. Here they are getting loaded, flying to Rwanda, and then being driven from Kigali to Akagera National Park. It's about 3 hours. And then this picture just wanted to show the people. You need a massive team of people working with you on these projects. This is some of the key people on the ground. Pete Morkel, the vet, who did a fantastic job. Jez Gruner, who's the manager of Akagera National Park. Jan Steiskal, who was absolutely instrumental in making this project happen and representing EAZA during the press releases in Akagera. Veronika Varakova, who's the ambassador for the project and did an amazing amount of fundraising for us. And finally, Eugene Musaganda, who did a wonderful job. He's worked for the Rwandan Development Board and really helped us with all the paperwork we needed to make this happen. Again, don't forget the keepers, the people and curators who work to get these animals ready. This is Jiri Chirubi, Diverkrolove Zoo. I'm sure some of you recognise him. And again, the work they did to prepare the animals was just fantastic. The keeping work continues. They have now been released from the bomas into 1 hectare pens. And there's a huge amount of browse to collect, so we shouldn't forget the local keepers who are doing this work. Here's Drew collecting it, and here's one of the keepers collecting it. And the 2 people looking after them now, a guy called Drew Branton and Sherry Morkel. And just to finish off, Dan, if I've got time, just want to show you a very quick video of the park.
My name is Mumuje Leonidas. Here in Akagera National Park, I'm head of rhino monitoring. When I was here, my wife is this firearm, and my beloved children are rhinos. that when those rhinos will be released out to the boma, we will divide into 2 teams. So one team will stay here in the south, and another team will be deployed in the north to look after those 5 rhinos so that they cannot be poached or be cut by wire snares.
I just wanted to show you that quickly because I actually wanted to pay tribute to the people who put their lives every day at risk in protecting these animals in the wild. And Leonidas is just the most wonderful person who leads the security protection there. And I'm going to finish with this picture, which is actually 3 of our rhinos in Akagera, still within the pens, integrated together as they were at Diverkulove. They're now doing extremely well. They're actually now eating about 70% of their diet is the natural browse that's being cut for them. And we're still at that really interesting stage of the project. And they'll be released from these bigger areas onto the main peninsula, probably towards the end of the year. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mark. In the interest of time, we're going to continue quickly with the next speaker. We are 10 minutes or so behind on schedule, so but we saved the citizens for last, so I'm sure you want to stay to see all the talks. The next talk is by Achim Johann, who is the director of NaturZoo Rheine and also the vice chair of the EP committee, but will be speaking on more on his role of the Brazilian TAG chair and the coordinator for the Gelada EP. Here you go, Achim.
Thank you, Danny. Hello, everybody. So, yeah. My topic, from your problem to our goal, and I want to give you 2 examples for implementing the long-term management plans, so maybe a little bit showing how theory comes into practice. So you should be, meanwhile, a little bit aware with how the new EP procedure is going. So EAZA tags, advises, in situ conservation links are working in a one-plan approach towards regional collection plans. So RCPs, and they are deciding on a level of programs, EEP or not, and they are defining the roles and goals. So then we come to the new EEPs, and they have specifically defined roles and goals. Each EP must have a long-term management plan, and these are worked on, defined by the EP, by the Population Management Center of EAZA, by the TAG, and by advisors. And then the work starts implementing the long-term management plan, and there the EP coordinator, maybe advisors, and the EP participants have to come together. All roles and goals of the EP must meet individual demands and wishes. And this is what I want to show you on 2 examples, which you might know. The one is the ring-tailed lemur. It's not a raccoon, it's a ring-tailed lemur. So, ring-tailed lemur, you might know them, but perhaps not all know these are listed as endangered. These are lemur facts. We have currently maybe just 2,000 to 5,000 left in the wild, and the population is decreasing. As to SIMs, we have 2,500 in EAZA zoos. As to SIMs, we also have 1,000 in zoos outside EAZA, and this means we have 3,500 registered kept ex situ, plus how many non-registered? No idea. There is an online site called Zootierliste in Germany, which are listing all the animals they know which are kept everywhere in private, smaller collections, wherever. And there, the ring-tailed lemur is on rank 23 among all the currently kept species in European zoos. So number 1 is peacock, number 2 pygmy goat, and then you can see how many ring-tailed lemurs we keep in our zoos. And it's said that this species is not only the most common kept lemur in captivity, but also the most common primate. We defined the roles in our regional collection plan working procedure in 2018, and the roles were, of course, conservation, education, outside the range. This species is the iconic flagship species and is needed for the zoos to raise awareness for lemurs in Madagascar and the threats they are facing. They can form an insurance population which might also have the potential for a source for future reintroduction. However, there is no idea so far for any reintroduction. More or less, there are even confiscated animals kept ex situ in Madagascar, which should have a preference in this case. Ex situ research training our population has all the potential that we can gain experience in how to prepare and how to conduct release methods, with especially, of course, depending on how we keep them, and ex situ research training that the knowledge can later on transferred to Madagascar. It doesn't stop with the roles for such a popular species. Fundraising, of course, and then to provide financial support to in situ projects. Research education, this species has a huge potential to educate and train also students and others in research, so learn on behavioral biology. And it is the charismatic species in appearance and therefore is our flagship species. For all these defined roles, we thought the benefit and the feasibility are rated as high. So in consequence, of course, we will have an EP for ring-tailed lemurs, and this needs a proactive management and a dedication from all holders to, if we want to get the roles put in practice. So what about the individual zoos? For them, it's a popular species and a crowd pleaser. They might be even too common to be rare, and it is the Madagascar species. Listen to your visitors. When they see ring-tailed lemurs, they start dancing like in the movie, in the animated movie Madagascar. This is now a synonymous, so ring-tailed lemur is Madagascar. They are, of course, extremely popular for the walk-in with lemurs, the walk-in exhibits for primates. They are more or less easy to keep. And then there are the demands. Some zoos we want breeding, and others are happy with their single-sex groups. So occasionally the EP gets asked for help for placement, and this is it, why we need an EP? No, it's not. If we seriously want to ensure the defined roles, then we must take the conservation education serious, and we also, everyone should also consider how the educational role the zoo takes on ring-tailed lemurs. Is it what we want to tell about lemurs and about Madagascar and conservation, how we present, how we tell about these animals, how we behave with these animals? And I give the little example, if we accuse Madagascans that they use lemurs as photo props for the tourists, and we are doing more or less the same for our zoo visitors, is a little bit of a conflict thing. Insurance, we need a genetically healthy and demographically stable population. So even with 2,000 animals, not just let them go as they go. There is a kind of a management needed to keep it balanced. And we have to gain expertise. We have to initiate specialized research projects to gain the specific knowledge we need in case animals have to be provided for reintroduction. At the end, to get all these put in practice, we need a long-term management plan to ensure this professional management, and we met in February 2019 in the EAZA office, and there were some strategy and goals which you might, as ring-tailed lemur keepers, and these might be most of you, get confronted with in the very near future. So we don't think that sending out lemurs out of an EEP, out of EAZA, is really the solution to manage a population, as this might reflect negatively not only to the EAZA community, but also to the outer world and also to Madagascar if we do not care about animal welfare and just send them away as we can't place them anymore. So what we think is we must reduce the birth rate even by half, which is sufficient to maintain the population of this huge size and to avoid a surplus. The management strategy of the population is that we will develop a cycle for each breeding group, that they will reproduce 1 or even 2 years, and then there will be a gap for 2 to 3 years, then replacing males and to start on with breeding. So each group should get a chance to breed. In this way, it will also be balanced, that all lines will be equally represented. What we need for this is an enthusiastic EP coordinator for a hell of an EP. As you can imagine, Katharina Spizio will take this challenge, and I hope, wish, and think that she will also get fully covered by the institution to do this job, which might be in fact a full-time job. And we also are happy to get the expertise which we need in these jobs, and this is given by EAZA's Population Management Center. And we need the EEP participants who recognize that ring-tailed lemurs are an endangered species, that they follow the transfer and non-breeding recommendations, that they communicate in a timely manner, and review the educational performance on lemurs, and also facilitate on research on site. So I could also say, just simple, ensure a stable, healthy population ex situ and work towards an increasing and safe population of ring-tailed lemurs in situ. A little bit different with another species. This is a Gelada baboon, and they are listed currently as least concern on the red list. However, this list is from 2008, and it might be urgently to be revised. I think the most appropriate term is data deficient. Gelada facts, numbers in the wild, we just don't know, might be several 10,000s, but as I said, we don't know really. We currently keep in 29 zoos worldwide more than 400 geladas. All these zoos are cooperating in the EP, and we did a survey on the capacity within EAZA, and these are around 550 geladas. We did an exercise where we can say all in one. We had a meeting in May in Rheine over a gelada workshop with 30 participants, and so we did the RCP part, we did the EEP definition, and also the long-term management plan work for this. For the gelada, we do not see a direct conservation role, but indirect conservation role, research and training inside and outside the range. And therefore, we need more close to natural composed groups, and the connection to research, to universities, and then also to transfer this knowledge to the wild and to apply in Ethiopia. Geladas make a unique exhibit, and they are popular within the zoos, and also there is no immediate conservation role. We say in consequence we need EEP, as active management is needed to keep the population within the intended size and to conduct research and development of field methods, to train researchers and to educate the public on relevant topics. For the zoos, I must say, it is a popular species. We still have some potential that there is an increase. The number of holders grew to 29 from originally 6. But there is quite a number of zoos who just see their own interests in it. They say, yes, we want to breed, but no, ethically, we won't apply any population management tools. No, we can't keep male groups. No, we can't apply anything in this way, but we go on breeding, and you must take care that the animals go out, because otherwise we have a welfare problem for these animals. But they should realize it's not only their problem, it's our problem. It's not only an individual zoo, it's a program's problem. So if we seriously want to ensure the defined roles, we must go on with research, behavioral research in our zoos, and also support in situ research and conservation projects via the EEP, which has a leading role in a project. The long-term management plan in this way is this: we stabilize the target population at around 550, and this is why we start now to reduce the population growth, and as PMC is this better starting now to breaking than driving against the wall. And we will of course encourage research, and there is an excellent cooperation within a core group in this EEP now to work on these targets. So the coordinator is hopefully staying active in this way and is happy for the support it gets from PMC. And what I hope is that the EEP participants recognize their role as being part in the program, and realize that their individual issues are in the same way issues for the program, and that they accept and cooperate in applying reproductive management tools. So the common goal simply: great groups of geladas need a great group of cooperative institutions and persons. And then we are happily looking forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Achim. From Persimmons and Old World Monkeys, we will move to Chelonians. And I'd like to invite Matt Goetz on stage from Jersey Zoo, and Vice Chair of Chelonian Tech, who will talk about the RCP for Chelonians. Yes.
Thank you, Danny. Good afternoon, everyone. We only have 12 minutes, so I will very briefly, very quickly run you through the new EAZA RCP for Chelonians and point out some fairly high-level needs and the opportunity those create for ex situ conservation of turtles and tortoises. Of course, we had to prioritize down quite a lot. We had a workshop in May this year, and of the roughly 360-odd species of Chelonians, we had to prioritize this down to the about 50 we could deal with in a 2-day workshop. And taking the IUCN guidelines this plenary is about at hand, obviously that starts with a conservation review, with a status review of the threats, and we ended up using our most important, highest level group, the Asian turtles, which are most threatened since a long time, and also then took the testudinids, so the land tortoises, and looked at both of those groups' conservation status, the most updated versions, looking at critically endangered and endangered species with representatives in EAZA institutions. And also we obviously had to revisit our 14 existing programs at the workshop, and lo and behold, we ended up using this tool with 51 species we managed to deal with at the workshop. The rest we are postponing to a future workshop, but this is a quite good start. Of the 51 species assessed, 29 ended up with EEP recommendations, and if you look at the roles those new or future EEPs will have, then the main roles really are, as you can see here, 28 of 29 of the future EEPs will have a very direct ARC and insurance role. This is on the one side quite depressing that it really has come to that, but on the other side it gives us really great purpose and an urge to really do very quickly, very well in our EEPs. You can see here top right, probably the most stark example, Kuarazawi. We actually don't even know where that lives in the wild. It has never been found in its native habitat. Of course, it has been found, but only by smugglers, poachers, and collectors, but nobody in the scientific or zoo community has actually seen the species in the wild. And this is a common theme throughout the Asian turtles. The habitat is still there. It is really the poaching and the illegal trade that is the big problem. So if we have functioning insurance population and ARC populations, then there can be reintroductions into the wild. There can be species saved in their native habitat. A good 2/3 of our future EPs have a direct research and in situ support role, and that is a huge variety of what can be done, what is already being done, but this needs expanding rapidly. That can start with financial support for in situ research by third parties. There can be institution members going out, conducting research themselves, supporting breeding and reintroduction projects, head starting programs in the regions, but also here in our own communities, in our zoos, we have to do quite a lot of research initially, especially genetic, because the taxonomy has been and probably is still quite in flux with a number of species, and we're dealing with a lot of new subspecies, potential hybrids, so we need to figure out, first of all, what the genetics are, which lines, which animals we can actually use in our ARC and insurance populations. And then a good 1/3 of our new EPs also have a very direct in situ capacity building and training role. So we have a very large number of rescue centers in the various regions. We have breeding centers, head starting centers that reintroduce or care for breeding animals. And they do an incredibly good work, but they can use all the combined expertise we can give them as an experienced community, because the animals they care for simply don't have the time that all those centers can be left to reinvent their own wheels and learn from their own mistakes. So any expertise and guidance we can give them is really, really helpful. And indeed, this is already being conducted in some areas, but with the new EPs, this will go on much more. Just a very few high-level examples. We have a few breeding centers, head starting centers in countries which care for really the last remnants of their species, and obviously genetic management for long-term sustainability of those species is really important. So having EEP management, even reaching out to the population in those centers is really important for their genetics long-term management. We have members amongst us who head out for training those initiatives in the range countries, training, breeding and head starting programs by conducting workshops or by partnering up with other institutions, going out and training husbandry and best practice stuff. We have institutions that are running their own rescue research and breeding centers, or indeed supporting such centers in the regions in the long term with great commitment by sending out staff continuously to look to improve the knowledge and the husbandry work those centers do. But we must not forget where all this knowledge we are trying to transfer is coming from. It comes really, in the very first instance, from our own breeding efforts in EAZA institutions, and which are really a vital step, a vital first step to actually know what's needed and what we can teach people in the regions that do the big work. And maybe just one specific example I want to mention here is the International Turtle Breeding Center in Münster Zoo, which has really pioneered breeding techniques and husbandry techniques for the last 20 years. And without such initiatives, we would be so much poorer and so much less prepared to actually engage with all those other roles we're trying to achieve. But it is not really that only that high-level stuff everybody can engage here. There's not everybody prepared to really go out into the field, has the capacity to do so, or the willing background to let you. So involvement in those new breeding programs is really on all levels, from really running centers to just providing holding space. We are dealing with still very small ex situ populations of our most critically endangered EEP species that need expanding really rapidly, and they all need holding space. Now the problem is many of those really do poor exhibit species. Many of those are highly stressed easily. They need to be kept ideally in isolation from each other. So small holding spaces behind the scenes are really quite vital to achieve good ARC and breeding populations in our institutions. Obviously, if we hold species, we also develop our staff expertise, which then in turn can filter in our training roles. And that doesn't have to be in person. That can also help just by being involved in writing guidelines or procedures. But we're not really asking that everybody builds a breeding center for turtles, of course. But a little back room, 3 by 4 meters of floor space, really makes a hell of a difference for our species. They're fairly small, they're really inexpensive to run. It just needs, a handful, half a dozen square meters of space with some enclosures, and you can care for quite a good number of animals to rear that give a bit of buffer space for our populations. Now, you might not have at all the capacity to do this behind the scenes because you don't have off-the-show space. Now, consider, for example, what we see in quite a number of institutions now being developed, that all amongst their really naturalistic, nice planted enclosures, they have one display space which is kept very technical, very laboratory style, where institutions can show, what is going on in a breeding program. If we say EAZA institutions are running captive breeding programs, what is actually involved in that? How does that look? It doesn't necessarily mean we have nice planted enclosures for that, but it means, laboratory style rearing facilities. And you wouldn't believe, some of you probably do believe, but it's quite astonishing how visitors react to that and how you can engage with visitors if you show them the reality of what is actually involved in such breeding programs. Incubation techniques, if you show them running studbook programs on a laptop, if you show them all the measurement gadgets for temperatures, for humidities, all these kind of things, tongues and hooks, and the technology involved to provide actually good husbandry for those species, you can engage on a very different, very realistic level with the public, and they do really appreciate that and are really astonished what is involved in that. Now, if you don't like turtles, if you don't have staff that is particularly involved in Chelonians, I don't want to claim all your precious space for our little animals, but the same ideas, the same possibilities apply for amphibians, for example, for invertebrates, for example, all small species that really benefit from a tiny space that can be making a very, very big difference in our breeding programs and EEPs. So to summarize up, I really want to say if we are using the IUCN guidelines here in this plenary and for our RCPs, and if we use ex situ management for species conservation, and if we say we are doing that, if we use keywords and phrases like EAZA is doing breeding, conservation breeding, EAZA is holding insurance populations, then this should really feel like an obligation to every single one of our institutions. Because let's face it, it's not just the turtles that are really endangered and running out of time. No, the zoo community itself is under scrutiny. So if we can, on all levels, from the big ones down to very small-scale breeding rooms, show our commitment and actually show to the visitors the proof that everyone in the EAZA community is involved in that, I think that does not only benefit the species we care for and try to save, but also the zoo community as a whole. And with that, I want to thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Matt. You stuck to time perfectly, and I would also again echo your message. There's a great need for the Chelonians for ex situ conservation, but there's also great opportunities, as you say. So again, if you're interested, please follow up with Matt and the TAG for opportunities if you want to engage. Moving from Chelonians to another topic, we're going to focus now on the power of the collective data of our institutions and the power that data has for conservation work. And I would like to invite Dalia Conde from Species 360 on stage to explain us that. Thank you.
Hello, and I hope now my topic is not full of amazing animal photos, although I put some of those. And I'm going to talk about data, but when I talk about this, I'm really talking about you. I'm really talking about the work this community has been doing since 1974, when the International Species Information System, now Species 360, started. And When I discovered this community was in 2010 in a CPSG meeting, and since then I realized that as a conservation biologist that if I wanted to make a difference, it was with you, it was with this community. And thank you for having me here. So as a data lover, there is not a better time to be alive as now. We're living the data revolution. We're living what is the data deluge. Some of you right now are generating data by posting things on Twitter or Facebook. And about 99% of all the data created has been produced in the last 8 years. All humanity information. And now we are swamped with data. And this is a photo of the Music of Library in Seoul that was opened in 2015. This library has vinyl, the acetates for music, 10,000 records. Now we can have all this information in an external drive of the size of this beautiful bird. And everything, we can have it here and carry it with us. We have the technology to have this information in very little space, but not only that, to be able to analyze high amounts of data that are highly variable, that are coming from all types of sources and in all types of standards in a very high velocity. That's why companies are fighting now for access to information and access to data. The marketplace of our economy is changing. We're making decisions based on high amounts of information. Data is considered a higher market source for income and competition than fossil fuels, which is quite a good news. So the problem is, how can we manage all these amounts of data? And this was published in 2 years ago, and it's amazing in 2 years how we have a step up in how we can tame the big data. There is a lot of discussion about this. We're having all these companies having to all this big data, but what about governments too? Can we determine who will enter the European Union based on their last Amazon purchase, their Twitter account, etc.? So there are all these discussions about how data and all the data you are producing is going to change the way not only we buy stuff, but the way politics can be run. Just in May was the Big Data Expo in China, and there were at least 39 big Fortune companies on this export, and they had 50 topics of global issues to discuss about how big data and the data revolution can help with big issues. One of those was poverty alleviation, but the biodiversity crisis was never touched, even with the latest report from the IPBES. But big data can be extremely important for the decision-making process. For example, conventional biological diversity has knowledge mapping and assessing the types of knowledge that's very important, defining which species, which will change in appendix. We were just last month with colleagues from EAZA and WASA in the CITES COP. What about the information we need for the IUCN ex situ guidelines? What if you can have that information at your fingertips so we can make those decisions? So, of course, we need to tame the data, we need to obtain the data to be able to provide those resources to you. And this data, in terms of biodiversity databases, is all over the place like many other types of information. It's highly scarce in different places, and although we are having a revolution of getting more and more and newer types of data, what we are seeing right now is that this data is not interconnected. One is the taxonomy issue, and the other are the vocabularies. But you, all of you, are ahead of the game. And especially EAZA members that are part of the Species 360 network, because you share data real time. You have standards for medical. You have standards for taxonomy. You integrate all this information, and of course, we need to improve it. We need to improve quality. We have to improve a lot, but you are so ahead of the game compared to any other conservation or organization or biodiversity convention. You can mark the way how biodiversity data start functioning in the future. And I want to say that especially EAZA members, that all are sharing the data in the same platform. As you know, we have around 21,000 species in SIMS and millions of historical individuals. And recently, we started what we call the Conservation Science Alliance, in which was first incepted the concept at a meeting in Copenhagen Zoo, and that I want to thank the support from WASA and Wildlife Reserve of Singapore and Copenhagen to the Alliance. So what are we doing? What we're doing is we work with a network, and the network I'm showing is really a network of scientists, universities, and NGOs. And we're trying to integrate this network with our member network and the data to map knowledge for the decision-making process. So we're trying to interconnect, map, index, and monitor knowledge to support decision-making process. And this is one of the big goals that we're trying to do among many other projects that you might have heard from some of the members of the team. The first project that we just published recently is a Species Knowledge Index. And what we're trying is, what about if we could map knowledge? What about if you could know how much do you know for every described species of the planet? If we know how much do we know, we can better prioritize, well, do we need to invest in knowledge, but as well, we can know which information we have to decide which are the next big move on conservation. So our first index was the Demographic Species Knowledge Index, and this is because I was based on a Max Planck Institute for Demographic Research, so we decided to start with demography. So it's not a coincidence. And we just recently published this paper in which we mapped how much do we know. So if you can see the colors, each pixel tells us how much information is in fertility and on mortality. And at the top, we have the purple that shows information level that you need for a population viability analysis. Very good level of information, which means population level. All the boxes in the middle and down there, what it really are showing is if you have information average at first reproduction, maximum lifespan. So it's one data point for the whole species. It gives you information, but you cannot do a lot with that information. So we decided to map this information and say, can we visualize and can we measure how much do we know for all the species, that we can do that. And I'm going to ask that we map it, and if someone that has not read this article, I don't think everybody has read it, maybe 2 or 3 people here, but you should read it if you have the time. How much do you think we know? Any number. Which percentage of the species we have the highest resolution of knowledge? Just give me a number and you will get this bird. 60%. Okay, who said it? Oops. So when we map it, we were surprised because the highest level of knowledge is 1.9%. And what we can see in that map that I think is beautiful, every pixel is one species for mammals, for reptiles, mammals, birds, and amphibians. And every pixel is how much do we have information on 22 open data repositories that have been peer-reviewed in the literature. But then we ask how much this data comes from captive, wild, or unknown sources? How much this information is really from the wild? Because all the big papers, many of the IUCN assessments use these databases. And for our surprise, is 66% of the species, the origin of the records is unknown. We don't know if it comes from a population in captivity or a population in the wild. But we're still using this information. So one of the goals of this exercise was not only to map knowledge, but to show how all your work and the work of your record keepers across all these years can improve this knowledge. And since we don't know for 66% of the species if the information comes from captive, wild, and unknown, we say, well, if we can, at least from our members, we know that the information comes from captive populations. And in future in the wild, we're going to start having SIMs in situ. But I don't know if anybody, and I don't have another bird, but if you have any idea how the information you have collected can improve this knowledge, anybody can have an answer, and I will get you a bird. I know there is a bird for you. Anybody? Raise a hand. How much do you think we can improve the knowledge based on the information all our members have been collected across more than 1,100 zoos and aquariums all over the world? Any ideas? Nothing? No? Okay, I will keep the bird. So we can increase almost 800%. From 1.9%, we can increase it to 60%. So what you see in pink is information from a Species 360 data with at least 70 individuals for which our population demographic models can deal with the uncertainty. So with this, I want just to finish by mentioning that this information is not only important to fill knowledge gaps, but we have been approached by the CITES Secretariat to be able to include our information, but as well the expertise of our members for the resolution 17.7 to create a manual to differentiate between wild-caught and captive-bred turtles, to help them with developing the Asian big cat database, and just to show you, this is how much we can increase knowledge for all the CITES listed species. So for me, it was really, really incredible to be at the COP a few weeks ago and to see that the parties mentioned that the data from zoos and aquariums should not be presented in a side event, but should be part of the agenda and should be included. How can CITES can really start working more closely with us, not only for all the knowledge you can provide in terms of management of captive individuals, but as well in terms of all the information that all of you are providing to Species 360 every day. So with this, I'm going to say thank you very much.
Thank you, Dalia. That's really impressive what you can do with the data and the collective knowledge of all of your data, as Dalia has said, and I especially like you throwing songbirds around. But I'm sure I know Simon long enough, he will send you a check for those too. So we're going to move on to a talk from Johannes Refisch from UN GRASP, and Johannes will talk to us about how partnership with the EPs under the Great Ape TAG and the Great Ape TAG, and indeed with the EAZA members, can contribute to the conservation of species of apes. Johannes?
Yeah, thanks, Danny, for inviting me to come here. And to be honest, I had to check the title first and check, well, I'm talking on ex situ conservation. I'm probably the last person who should be doing this. But you could assure me that there's a one planet approach and I won't be declared an endangered species, so that's the good news. So I'm going to talk about GRASP and what you as EAZA and member zoos can do for GRASP and what we can do for you. So GRASP is the only species or taxa-specific secretariat under the UN. The secretariat is provided by UNEP and UNESCO, and I have the privilege of leading that secretariat. I'm actually based in UNEP in Nairobi. Our members include the convention secretariats, Convention on Biological Diversity, CITES, CMS, World Heritage Center, Ramsar, and others. We have 23 Great Ape range states, over 50 NGOs, 4 private businesses, donor governments, and foundations. And our mandate is to conserve great apes and their habitats in Africa and Asia. So when you look at the different membership categories, EAZA and the number of individual zoos, they fall under conservation organizations, and we have Barcelona Zoo, Bristol Zoo, Chester Zoo, Copenhagen Zoo, Twycross, ZSL in London, and obviously there's space for more. I want to start with a report GRASP and IUCN prepared for Society Secretariat and the status of great apes and great ape habitats. Because if we want to address threats to great apes, we have to know where we are and what are the main threats. So in that report, it came out quite clearly that our number one challenge in most cases, not everywhere, but in most cases, is habitat loss. And I just referred to a paper from Bill Lawrence in Australia that there are 33 new development corridors planned in sub-Saharan Africa. And we have a rate of change in Africa we have never seen before. And in most cases, we have no cross-sectoral land use planning. There's often no regulatory framework, neither in the government, nor in the private sector, nor in the organizations which provide funding for those huge development projects. And often the actors involved do not follow best practice guidelines from the World Bank or the International Finance Corporation. And often as a byproduct, we also lose great apes due to illegal trade and body parts. So what is GRASP doing? So we center our interventions along 6 priority areas. That's law enforcement, judiciary, advocacy, habitat protection enhancement, disease, conflict-sensitive conservation, and green economy. And I'll give you a few examples. So under 1, the law enforcement, our main intervention is the development of the ape seizures database. So we developed the database in partnership with the World Conservation Monitoring Center in Cambridge. We launched the database at the CITES COP in Johannesburg, and we are now in the process of validating data. And I do know that a lot of your partners are actively involved in the database. Maybe the thing where GRASP can really help you, because we are under the UN and we can use the diplomatic channels, it's really advocacy. I can give you many examples, but maybe the 3 or 4 most prominent examples. So we, together with IUCN, were engaged in discussions on the IFC Performance Standard 6. IFC is the International Finance Corporation, the lending arm of the World Bank, if you want to say. And we managed to revise the standards, and now any company obtaining a loan from the IFC and whose operations might potentially have a negative or detrimental impact on great apes and the habitats, they are obliged to seek expert advice from IUCN. That has never happened before, and it doesn't exist for any other taxa. Also, that was just a couple of weeks ago, the French government, which has the presidency of the G7, invited me to speak to the G7 ministers about biodiversity partnership and to explain the experiences we have in GRASP. It doesn't happen that often that I have the privilege of talking to 16 ministers. But again, GRASP is a partnership, so I basically are the voice of many partners. We are 105 partners right now. Also something which is maybe not what you are familiar with, but we were also involved in the revision of the mandate of the UN peacekeeping mission in Congo. You might think, well, why is that important? Well, it's important because we were able to include a little, very trivial sentence on the environment. But now, park rangers in the DR Congo who operate in conflict areas can ask the peacekeeping mission for security support. That never happened before as well. And then I just want to refer to the introductory talk at the first plenary by my colleague from IUCN. So we work very closely with IUCN on the CBD post-2020, biodiversity framework, CITES, CMS, and many other multilateral environmental agreements. I said habitat protection, our #1 priority. I'm very happy to report on 2 really big projects which we were able to secure most recently. One is the sustainable management of the Congo peatlands, and that falls under the German International Climate Initiative. And the second is called Vanishing Treasures, funded by the government of Luxembourg, and I will tell you what we hope to achieve under both projects. So Vanishing Treasures is a really exciting project which is focusing on climate change adaptation, mountain and flagship species. So we will be working on the snow leopard in Central Asia and Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan. Well, not grasp, I mean, I understand my taxa. I'm not expanding my territory, but my colleagues are working on the snow leopard in Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. Then we have colleagues working on the Bengal tiger, and we as GRASP will implement the mountain gorilla component in Uganda and Rwanda. And I just give you a little example. The climate is really changing. Both these photos I've taken probably 20 years ago. And during the dry season, the Virungas, there were lots of foggy days, and the dry season wasn't really an issue. But now the swamps have been drained, the foggy days are not there anymore, and we sometimes have 10,000 people entering the parks. That causes all kinds of problems for the park managers. The second project is focusing on the 2 large peatland areas in the 2 Congos, the Lactede Lactumba. And it's one of the most remote places on this planet. I had the privilege of doing a scoping mission in 2010, and especially the area in the Republic of Congo has been disconnected basically from civilization up to very recently. And there was also a Nature paper in, I think, 2017 indicating that that area contains an estimated 30 gigatons of carbon. That's equivalent of 2 years of global greenhouse gas emissions. But also, it's the area with the highest densities of western lowland gorillas. And we also have bonobos, chimpanzees, and forest elephants. So why is it important? It has been disconnected from civilization. Now the governments are in the process of issuing concessions for oil and forestry and palm oil and others. We hope, with a really huge €50 million project, that we can bring all the partners together, all the sectors, and facilitate cross-sectoral and transboundary land use planning. And I believe that's where the UN can come in, because we can facilitate across countries and across sectors. Shortly speaking about disease, we published a report, Ebola on Great Apes. That was at the height of the Ebola crisis, a very important contribution. And let me briefly mention what we do on conflict-sensitive conservation. We have been involved in 3 very important transboundary areas, the Virungas, and that Luxembourg project will basically contribute the climate change component to hopefully a new action plan for mountain gorillas. We just kick-started a new project for the conservation of the cross-river gorillas, and we actually kick-started and have been supporting the transboundary collaboration between Côte d'Ivoire and Liberia. And finally, green economy. Palm oil is a main issue. It has been a big issue in Asia. It's coming over to Africa. We did a lessons learned paper called the Palm Oil Paradox. So we try to basically turn this into a global strategy on sustainable palm oil. We are supporting RSPO, a certification body, and we are also have been supporting Cameroon, and hopefully will also be able to support Liberia in developing a sustainable palm oil strategy. So what can EAZA do, and what is what I believe your comparative advantage? Well, when I hear that how many 140 million people visit zoos, this is more people than the UN can ever reach. I wish we could, but we can't, unfortunately. So what you can do in terms of awareness raising is just fascinating. And also you can reach out to an audience. I'm not able to reach with GRASP. It's very difficult for me to reach out because it's outside the traditional conservation space. I also think that you can play a prime role in influence consumer behavior. I mean, I'm afraid to say that probably in that computer there's a little bit of coltan from the Congo, but we all use palm oil in different forms. We like our chocolate. So there's a lot where the consumer can play a role. You do already support a number of field activities. We had many talks here, whether it's census work or eco-guards or Great Ape action planning. I'm just seeing Franz somewhere down there. We both have been very actively involved in the development of the Western chimpanzee action planning process. I think that's very important. You can support community engagement in Great Ape conservation and ecotourism, and you can also look into, I think, innovative financial tools. And I give you 2 examples. Under the Luxembourg project, we are partnering with 2 companies, Runtastic and the Internet of Elephants. Runtastic belongs to Adidas and is a mobile phone running app. So you can see, some of you are runners, I know that. So you know what you do, the distance you cover. So what we will do is, we will create a similar profile for a snow leopard, a Bengal tiger, and a mountain gorilla, so that you can see whether you're really competitive or not. But we also link it to story runs that you can learn more about the species. So Internet of Elephants, they're really crazy IT guys, and they are in the process of developing augmented reality games, and they're partnering with an orangutan project and a chimpanzee project in Congo, and hope to launch that augmented reality game with Chester Zoo and Atlanta Zoo, I think in April next year. That's a fantastic launch pad, and I hope that maybe more zoos can help to make that game popular. So, and finally, going beyond just virtual reality and running up, which you can obviously support. You can support us actively and financially with our conservation project, and I mean the GRASP Secretariat, but also our partners. But you can also become a member of GRASP. Many are, but there's space for more. And also getting back to the conservation action planning, Franz has been playing the role of somehow as a central communication point for chimpanzees. I would love to have an EAZA focal person for gorillas and for chimps, and that person would ideally attend the conservation action plan. I mean that we have a direct interface between the in situ world and the ex situ world. And finally, we hope that these little guys and the other little guys can survive for a little longer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Johannes, and I think your talk, you've explained to yourself almost how relevant the link between ex situ and in situ conservation is, and how the 2 worlds can really come together to work, in this case, for the survival of apes. Also, thank you for taking the time to attending the conference. I know you had a busy schedule and a sprained ankle, so very much appreciated. Right, moving on, there's 2 talks to go. I think we will be finishing 10, 12 minutes past time, but I hope you take the courtesy of also listening to our final speaker. Before we move to him, we first have back on stage Simon Bruslund, who will be talking about the Asian threatened songbird RCP. Simon.
Hello everyone, this is really a nice company to be in. This is really interesting, and it's great to have the songbirds involved. And we'll go straight through it. We did an old-styled RCP just in 2017, so it's not that long ago. And these little songbirds are also big data, because we evaluated some 6,597 different taxa. We did that in the old style with the traditional decision tree, going through all the steps and to develop categories for all of these taxa. So I was a little bit critical to the fact that it was told, okay, now we have to do the new style, and it's just 1 year later. And I was a little daunted with the thought of going through all these, but we finally decided we need to do a subsection. We have to do a selection of birds out of certain criteria. So we selected 145 different priority species which are linked to the Asian songbird crisis, which are threatened by trade in Asia. On I deliberately call it here the integrated style instead of the new style. I'm a little bit afraid if we develop this further, we'll soon have the new style, and I think maybe integrated style is better. But Asian origin affected by trade, and the old RCP, which we have, is of course still in place and valid for all the remaining birds. Maybe a side information here on this. The time it took to evaluate the 6,500 species were about the same time we needed to select and evaluate the 145 in the new form. But it was a rewarding process, and it was very much worth the time. We had a great group at the mid-year and joint tag chairs meeting in Budapest in May 2018. And we're not only the people in the picture, but during this meeting, which was where the RCP workshop ran parallel to a mid-year meeting, we had different people and different experts on different species trickling in and trickling out of the meeting during the 2-day workshop. If we really boil it down, we had really great control of the situation and steering by Kathy Taylor-Holzer, and we really was focused. But if you really boil it down, if you take all her comments and also what we need to do, next species and so on, what it really comes down to is there a need for an active management, any kind of active management? Is there somebody who has to do something for this to work out and happen? Are we able to do this? It's the second question. Can EAZA fulfill this role? And does it need our manpower now? So there's a time component, there's a ability component, and of course there's a need. And behind this is all the roles and functions and so forth. But this, for me, is what it comes down to, is those 3 questions. And if we have 3 times yes, that means we have an EEP on our hands. And we did come down to some 23 new EEPs. It was a bit more than this group of birds had in the old type of RCP. But marked yellow is those within this group which are a little bit out of the unusual, a little bit more alternative thinking was needed to develop those EEPs. And I'm just going to go through some of them for your interest. Here we have the group of pittas. They're beautiful birds. They're actually wonderful exhibits. They just sit there in your exhibit and look fantastic. And we have had times in the past where we had tremendous breeding success, 35 youngs in 1 year out of a very small population. So we're kind of comfortable that we can do these birds, but still the population completely crashed, as you see here. So we could say we failed and we're not able to maintain pittas, but still pittas are important. And these Guernsey pittas are the reason why. So the Guernsey pitta has almost gone extinct and recovered and rediscovered and almost gone extinct again twice in the last 28 years or 30 years now. And we're actually looking at this time it's for real, and the Guernsey pittas is going to disappear if action is not done. And one of the proposed actions would be ex situ management, but if we're not able to do this, we will fail. So this EEP has the purpose of developing and pushing forward the research and the improvement of our abilities to take care of pittas. Very similar is the situation for leaf birds. There's a number of different taxa, and there's been a surge in the interest of leaf birds in the bird markets in Asia. And currently, these 3 species, the Javan, the greater green, and the Sumatran leaf bird, is listed as vulnerable. But there's a few of us who actually realized that this is one of those cases where the IUCN red lists cannot keep up with the pace of the demand in the markets. So particularly the Javan leaf birds may already be critically endangered. So again, we have some leaf birds in zoos. This is a least concerned grayish-crowned leaf bird, which is now breeding in Vienna Zoo and is picking up in a few other zoos. But these are the only birds we have. If you look at in this case, from species 360 data on the collective leaf birds, you've seen we've gone from a quite large population down to a very, very small population. We experienced a big crash exactly at that time where we could no longer replenish our population with wild-caught birds. So we need to be able to breed these birds better if we want to be sustainable and independent from supplementation from the wild. And of course, the next step is to have these abilities to be able to replenish birds in the wild or gain time in case that is needed to stop and mitigate the problems there are. Other things are the hill miners. And I have heard when I've been talking about that hill miners are important and we need to put more focus on them. There have been, we always say, zoo directors or colleagues who in the room who said, hill miners, they're so common, everybody have them, why are you going on about those? But there was a time, and I'm sure many in the room will remember, that you go to any pet shop and there will be a hill miner. But those times have gone, and those birds are no longer there. And the population in our zoos is maybe not as dramatically as the two previous species, but definitely massively declining. And it indicates that we are failing to maintain those species over time. And it is a question of upping our game and becoming better at what we do, because I know we can do it, we just need to be a little bit more concentrated. And this is important in this case because we are considering making an EEP, but we're not so much worried about population management and looking at the genetics as we are in improving the husbandry with the holders, maybe finding systems to build really good compatible pairs. And this is important because this EEP would also serve as an embassy for very closely related but severely threatened species we don't have. And it's an embassy for fundraising, it's an embassy for collecting and developing knowledge which we can use for those species down the line and in not too distant future. We have other species like these ones. These are Javan sparrows. These are quite common. There are lots of them in zoos. Quite a few of them are not exactly the wild type. They have been domesticated and have been developed mutations in the population causing white or fawn or pied colors. We also noticed that they might not be quite the same size that they used to be in the wild. So we're using 100-year-old museum specimens to define what would actually a wild Javan sparrow have looked like, so we can at least have some guidelines of what we would have our zoo population look like in the future. But these are very prolific. They're breeding too well. And I know it's in the bird world we don't usually have that problem. In the mammal colleagues, it's a different matter. But we don't, when it's an easy species, we very often don't set in the resources needed to do a proper population management. So we do have an overproduction in many, many zoos of these Javan sparrows. So we're thinking about developing a colony breeding system where a group, a circle of zoos would work together and they will define a breeding target and then they will breed that target and no more, and every year pass the offspring of one sex onwards to the next zoo. So we will come somewhere close to a managed breeding program, but in a somewhat easier way so that we can have a optimized resources in this case. This is the current population trend, and you can see if it continues like that, we will have no room for the other songbirds we're talking about. Other EEPs, like this one for the red-fronted laughing thrush, have the main purpose of working as a conservation tool. We need to manage populations which are not in our zoos. The majority of these birds are kept in Southeast Asia, in the regions where they're from, and we fortunately have a growing population. Unfortunately, the numbers you see here may be all that's left. But the purpose of this EEP is to help colleagues in region manage these species in a professional way that will give this species a future. And in the case of the Javan pied starling, this is a bird that used to be as common as the blackbird in some countries in Europe. It's a cultural follower. It's a bird you'll find in the rice paddies, in the paddy fields, but it's a bird that now has gone from the wild. It has only been rescued and saved because there's a somewhat financial commercial interest, and breeders have been keeping them going. Now they're hybridizing them with close related species to make them larger or prettier, just to increase the market value. So we need to pick up on that initial rescue and put these birds into a captive breeding program that would save this species and take the available ex situ population, which is in bird dealers or in pet shops essentially, and put them into a managed population. So it's also an EEP, which is managing a species we don't actually have in European zoos. So that's just out of the box. I'll finish with this little video, if it runs. It does. And enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.
And then this runs for 60 minutes, right? So whilst you're looking at these pretty birds, I'm going to also introduce our next and final speaker, which is Lorenzo von Fersen from Nurnberg. And Lorenzo will be shortly speaking about the workshop that Nurnberg Zoo hosted about ex situ conservation options for small cetacean species. Thank you, Lorenzo.
So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and it's late. I will hurry up. And first of all, many thanks to EAZA for giving me the opportunity to talk about ESOC, and especially to Danny Deman for making that possible. ESOC is ex situ options for cetacean conservation, a workshop that Zoo Nuremberg and the NGO Jakobaja organized last year in December in Nuremberg. And before going into details of the workshop, I just want to invite you through for a journey back in time. And we are talking about December 2006. And there you see the title of an article that was published in Nature December 2006. And they're reporting about the results of an expedition with many, many scientists, many, many boats, many, many weeks traveling along the Yangtze River, looking for and trying to find and to catch the last Baijis, which is the Lipotes vexillifera, which is the Chinese river dolphin. And after many, many weeks, and many, many people, and many, many boats, they just found 0 Baiji. Today, this species is functionally extinct. 11 years later, it was October 2017, the same procedure, but with another species. Many, many people went, invested a lot of money in order to catch and to transfer the animals, the vaquitas, into this protected area called Nido. And the result, I think all of us, we know that one animal had to be released immediately. The second animal died 1 hour after it was caught. After that, the whole procedure was suspended. So we can talk, if we see these two species, if we see these two actions, we have to say that's a failure, something went wrong. And in the case of the Baiji, they didn't see any animals at all, so it's quite easy, the result. And in the case of the vaquita, there's certainly a lack of information about the species, how the animal react to this type of procedures. But one thing we can say for sure, and this is the last, it was always too late. And with this graph, I just want to show you what's the difference between late and too late. And this is 2017. I said it's too late. And the main question that all of us asked many, many years ago, what would have happened if all these catching and transferring procedure would have been done in, I don't know, 1996, as we still had 600, 700 animals. And this is a major problem that we are facing with many cetacean species. And it's not that the governments where these animals are living in the habitat doesn't do anything. Here you see a list of different conservation activities that were run by the Mexican government starting in 1993 and going up to 2017, from protected area to the ban of gill nets in the whole part of the upper Gulf of California. And what we saw is it didn't help. We have, on the other hand, a lot of conservation action plans. And that's very interesting, issued by IUCN, issued by governments, by NGOs. And all of them, they just focus on in situ conservation. So you don't see, at least in the small cetacean world, you don't see anything about ex situ option. And this was a little bit, well, and as I said here, despite all this action plan, despite all this in situ conservation action, we have seen that we lost, within 20 years, 95% of the whole vaquita population. And this was a little bit the reason why we decided in 2018 to run this workshop. And the main point is that we are having a lot of species showing a rapid population decline, that most of the problem are associated with fisheries, and that fisheries is something that the people need, and that changing this behavior of the people will take too much time. We don't have this time, therefore we say the clock is ticking. And in situ conservation, it's not enough. We need other tools in order to save species. And this is ex situ option for cetacean conservation. That's the title of this workshop. And here you see all the people that came to Nuremberg. We met in a monastery, was very, very interesting, 800 years old. And here you see all the organizations that made that possible. And I have to say that for the action as we, in 2017, as we try to catch vaquitas, to transfer them into a protected area, there were many or some EAZA members that supported us, and I have to mention this is Zoo Nurnberg, Zoo Boval, and Opel Zoo in, Opel Zoo, I don't know where they are, in Kronberg. Okay, here we are. So, very, very important that the people that we invited were not only zoo people experienced in ex situ management, we just had a lot of in situ specialists, especially field biologists that never heard the word ex situ management, and they never heard about one plan approach. So people that are working in Africa are working in South America or in Asia. We had ex situ specialists, we had representatives from VASA, EAZA, there were some people from ALPSA, EAZA from the American Association, and then we had vets, biologists, so a lot of other people. And the main goal of the workshop was to see if ex situ can be an option for the conservation of many of these small cetacean species. And this is very important that we recognize from the beginning the value of using the one plan approach, to use this frame, and to put all these activities that we are planning within this frame. So here are the 7 species on the top. This is Sotalia, Inia, Pontoporia in South America, Zusa, Toisi and Zusa plumbia in Africa and Asia, and then we have Platanista Ganges and Indus, and then the Irrawaddy dolphin. All these species share a shallow water coastal distribution, and the distribution overlap with a lot of human activities. Bycatch is a very important problem, and all of the species showed a rapid population decline. This is bycatch, this is direct kills, this is for bushmeat in Africa, this is the construction dam. The consequence is loss of animals okay. And then we applied, I have to hurry up, we applied this fantastic way, we used this fantastic document, and we went to all this 5 steps, and unfortunately, due to the lack of information, we found a lot of problems that we didn't have the real information. We could only run the first 2 steps, but we are, with this project, we are at the beginning, so there is a lot of information gap that we have to define, and the other thing is we have to see which role can ex situ play in the conservation of these species. So the recommendation of ESOC is to apply a stepwise species-specific approach from remote biopsy to full health assessment. We have to catch the animal, handle the animal for some time. Then to work effectively with zoos and cooperate with zoos because we need them, and with aquaria, and we should always think in applying always the one-plan approach. And one thing which is very, very important is that the capture of wild animals. There is a big difference about the public acceptance, not only the public general acceptance, but only from the scientific world. And this is one thing if Simon Bruslund is trying to catch some of his Asian birds. And another thing is if you want to catch a vaquita. And there was a big discussion, one of the reasons why the vaquita process of catching the animals and transferring them took so much time was that nobody wanted to have it. And there is, with all the other species, we are having similar problems, and this is something that we have to work on. We have to disseminate the whole idea. We have to present the data and all these conferences. Also, Society of Marine Mammalogy, I think this is very, very important. And we have now 2 opportunities, and this is a little bit the result of our ESOC workshop in December. We are having now a workshop, Franciscana workshop in Argentina in November 2000, beginning in November 2019, and the second one, and this is a symposium on the progress of the Yangtze finless porpoise conservation project. They are having the first ex situ population of these animals, nearly 110 animals, and this is being evaluated now. Thank you very much, and have a nice coffee.
Thank you so much, Lorenzo, and sorry for having to rush you there. But I know you will be speaking in the conservation open meeting tomorrow as well, for those of you that want to hear to Lorenzo with a slightly less high pace. Just in summing up the plenary, I think from an internal EAZA perspective, there's a lot of opportunity that we can do. We have a very much expertise and knowledge in ex situ conservation. The talks really showed that keeping data, working together, moving from a local hero approach, as Thomas Kaufels mentioned in his plenary opening speech, to working together collaboratively is very important. And then what I also mentioned in my opening is saying that we need to be proud of what we do. We can be proud of what we do, and we need to share this much more with governments and with field conservation partners. And the EAZA office will be working on that in Masaya next year and other congresses, but definitely also we need your support and help to do that. 2 final small last things to do. The first is an announcement that today and Friday at 6:30 there is a meeting for the nutrition group or nutrition session. That's an open session with a variety of presentations, and you're very much encouraged to attend if you can. And then lastly, I would like to ask for 1 round of applause for all the speakers. Thank you very much.